Hello and welcome. On this video, we are going to be continuing our edition of our Gatsby Starter Blog, and we are going to be editing the carousel or creating the carousel. So let's just dive right into the code. So on the last video, we did everything we needed to do to set up the carousel build. And so for those of you that didn't watch the last video, I recommend watching that. I also recommend downloading my code from GitHub, or at least taking a look at it. So last weekend, if you didn't hear it, last weekend I made these videos already, and I realized my audio was horrible. Hopefully it's a little better. And so I'm not going to be adding the code in right now, but I am just going to walk through it. So to reference what we're going to be making, hopefully your homepage is blank. You'll have this little bio about yourself. You'll have a blog still now running, blog page. You'll have your homepage, and we want to build these carousels. And particularly, we want to build an infinite carousel. And we don't want them to overlap with each other, so I want these to work independently. So let's dive in to our components folder. So we need to make a carousel.js file, and in that file, I believe I used similar code to I want to say the layout. No, what did maybe it was a bio. Nope, it's got to be one of these. Navigation. No, it wasn't navigation either. Okay, so the carousel, this is a class component, and I want to use a class component because I want a state, and the state is going to be the state of my carousel. So as I go through these, this is a state of the images in the rotation. Now I know React currently came out with hooks where you don't have to use a class component to use a state. You can use hooks and you can use a functional component, but for this particular example, we're going to just use a class component because, well, basically because that's the way I did it. So what do we want to build first? So the idea is, let's leave the methods. The methods are any function within a class. We're going to leave that for later. We want, so we can build our, basically the structure. We'll build our HTML. And I will walk through this and why I did what I did. So everything within the return, this is what's going to be shown on the page. Everything in between those parentheses. So the idea for a basic carousel is you have this div container, and within that container, you have your two buttons, your backwards and your forwards buttons. And then you have a display window. So the display window is everything in that you will see, and everything outside of it you won't. So you have, for that case, you have your overflow hidden. So if you were to remove that, you can see you have this carousel or all these images going across your site, and overflow hidden prevents that. So obviously, if we were to dive into that div, you will see the carousel list. So the carousel list is a collection of all your images. And if you open that div element, you'll see each element. And then within each element, it just wraps a little. It's just, I think, each one of these is a image and a link. So that's the basics of a carousel, basically. And then, so each image has a link to a page that we set up in the previous episode, I believe. Actually, cross that off. Forget what I said. We'll look at that in this episode or in this video. The buttons, they will reference a method, and that method will tell the carousel to move. And now the display window isn't moving. The display window is static. It's just going to be what the user sees. We want to move the carousel left and right, and to make the feel like it's moving left and right, we're just adjusting the width of the overall carousel list. I'm sorry, not the width, the transform. So translate 3D, and you can see it's just being absolutely positioned, and as it moves, there's a little transition in there, and that happens on each click. There's a little active class that gets added. So that is the basic structure idea. So now let's look at the actual HTML within the component. So we are getting our data from index.js, from our index.js file. And that's using GraphQL. And what I'm doing here is I'm using GraphQL, and I'm getting all of our website's markdown files. And when I do that, I'm marking it with a variable of websites. Now yours could be named something else. And what I'm doing is I'm passing this data in the component. And then that way I don't have to reference it in the carousel. So, and I can just keep everything. When I want to pass data in, I can just do it all in the index.js. And so you can see here I'm doing data.websites.edges. So the GraphQL is our data, and websites is what I am part of the linked list. And if you keep going down, going to edges. So node, everything in this object, I'm passing in all this information for each website, basically, or for each website markdown. And I'm passing it in here. And then later, the HTML is being displayed as I map through each node. So you can see, if I go up, it's referencing this .props. So it's title, data, this .props. So if you go back to index, what I'm passing in is the title and the data. Those are my properties for my component. And that's how I'm referencing it right here. And so I can use that later in my return. And I do right here. So I do a data.map. And then as I map through each one I'm just going to say it's a node object. And then I can grab the URL, I can grab the slug, I can grab the ID, and I can dynamically display each one in my list. So you might be thinking, okay, that gets each node element, right? But why do I have these other items? Because that's what these are being called. These are called items. That's what I named them with my style component. Why am I adding extra items before and after? Well, since it's a carousel, I have to add, let me refresh this. I have to add them here because if I go left or go to the previous, this needs to be already created. This element needs to be built already. If I didn't, it would just be empty. And that's, and since it's 3 wide, that's also why we have to do all 3. So that you can see the element that's generated is already displaying. Or I'm sorry, the element in the map is still displaying, so that's why I have to add a 3rd. So if I were to get rid of that, see, now it's still displaying. That's because that's actually a copy of the one that's generated within the map. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of confusing to do this, but if this wasn't a infinite carousel, you would not need this. You could just easily display all the items in a map, right? And what would happen is if you try to go left or previous, you couldn't. You could only go. It would be unidirectional. You could only go one way. But because I wanted that infinite functionality where you can just keep going, like the Energizer Bunny, and it never stops. It's a little glitchy. But still have some work to do on that. And so that's the same for the next 3. I did the same thing. And keep in mind, these are actually, so it goes to 1 through 4. So this is actually the first node, and that's why I named them first node, second node, third. And then these are the opposite order. So hopefully that makes some sense. No matter what carousel you add or what images you add, that's how it's going to work. Because this is a reference. If I find it, do I Command F? To up here. Yeah, so this is the data. That's the first in the array, and second, yeah, you get it. And then the last one, second last, and third last. Okay. I use style components for most of this, or for what I could. So with the transition, I had difficulty using a style component. For some reason, Gatsby would not let me use a style component and use a transition. And I spent days on it trying to figure it out, possibly weeks. I did a lot of research, but what happened was I would click and there'd be no smooth transition. I would add the class, it would all seem like it should work, but all that needed to be done was I had to change my style component to just a regular div, and I had to wrap it. And that's why you see this sporadically within this component. It's kind of messy. I challenge you to clean it up. Please do. It definitely needs some cleaning up. So continuing on, we have our previous button up here, style component, and we have our next button. They do the same thing, except they go in different directions. So we'll just use the previous button. On click, it's going to call a function. It's going to call, in this case, a method called this.shiftSlide, and it's going to call in a parameter of -1. Oh yeah, these are our style components. You can take a look at this and use that and reference that. But all right, so on click shift.slide -1. So here's our method, shift.slide, and then direction. So if it's 1, do this. If it's -1, then do this. And what this is doing, calls another method, and it says this.previous. And it's referencing our state of our X value. So that's the main functionality of our carousel, is the X value state. if I can get this. So our X value is actually, right now, it's negative 1200 pixels. And what that will do is so since we're going back, it's going to take our X value and it's going to add on the width of our image. And that's how it will move. So it actually, see how it went up? So it went from negative 1200 to negative 900. So it went up 300. But in reality, it's going backwards. It's kind of confusing. Hopefully that makes sense. And then index, just so we can keep track of the index being where we start our carousel. The stat state. So yeah, we're just subtracting 1 because we're going backwards. And then the next does the same thing except the opposite. The stat state. So if we'll go up to our constructor method. We're passing in props, which we need to do. I forget why. For this particular carousel, we have to pass in props and use super props. And I'm trying to remember why. You know what? I will let you figure that out, but I know for a fact we have to include that in this component. And if you figure it out, you know, email me or actually leave it in the comments below so everyone else knows. Because I need to fact check as to why. So we have this .image count, and that's just going to be how many images. I just remembered why. I just remembered why we need super props. Okay. It has to do with this image count. Can you guess why? So when you use super, the reason you use super, I'm sure there are other reasons, is when you want to reference a property within your constructor. And so that's what we're doing here. We're passing in the properties. In this case, it's all the data from our GraphQL. It's coming into our props. And since we want to use that information in our constructor, we have to use super props. And that's the main reason why I'm using it here. There might be other reasons, but that's why we have to use it. Great that I remember that. So to get image count, that's what we're using. We're using the props data.length. So we're getting the length of the amount of the array of images that we have, or the website posts. And that's how we keep track of image count. And then we're going to check the index. The index changes each time we go the next button or the previous button. This goes adds 1 or subtracts 1, but it starts at 0. And then this is the main core functionality of our carousel, is the state. It's the most important part, because without it wouldn't move. So it's kind of a big deal. We're starting at negative 900 because if you remember, we have these other 3 images before our like index 0, I guess, if you will. So 3 times 300 width is 900. I probably should make this dynamic, but for now, because I plan on using our images to be, or I plan on having my images be 300 width, I'm just going to leave that at 900 for now, because that scares me, just having a number, static number in there like that, but it's okay for now. Starting index is 0, allow shift to be true. That's how we prevent someone from like clicking too much. See how it It's a little glitchy, but for the most part, you can't click 10 times while it's shifting. And that's what the allow shift does. If it's true, then you can basically the button works. Active, that will be a class, and that class does that smooth transition. That's all that does. It's like the carousel is active and it transitions. Continuing on, we have this.images, and that's an object, and it's going to take the count of the images, which is what we referenced earlier, which I don't know if we need that. That is the same thing, but I'm going to leave it for now, just for the sake of it. And then the width is the width of our image, which should be, it's actually not the width of our image, because our image width is 280. The width is the width that we want to move. So it's actually 280 plus the margin. So yeah, see, that's 280. And then the margin right might be 10. Yeah. Margin on both sides is 10, which equals 300. So don't get that confused with the actual image width. It's the width of the image plus margin. Okay, so you should have a basic understanding of how the component works. Now there's just a couple more component or methods that we need to clear up in order for this to work. componentDidMount, or I'm sorry, componentDidUpdate. So componentDidUpdate, when you change the state, it's after the state has been updated, this will fire. So it makes sure that it's like, yeah, it just works after the component changes, or the state changes, which is great for this case. So if the state is active, meaning if it's transitioning, then we'll turn it off after 500 milliseconds. And because you click the button, turns it on, and then once it updates, it waits 500 milliseconds, because that's the time that our carousel moves. And after that time, the active turns to false, so it removes that class, and then it allows a shift to happen again. Okay, and then it also it calls this .index, check index. So after it's done, it checks the index, and if you go down to check index, what this does, check index basically checks where the carousel is at. If it's been moved too much, if it's been moved one way too much, then it will reset. So if we do, it says this set state, if it's -1, image count, check index. So what it actually is doing, I'll just show you. We have -1200 pixels. If we go previous, if we go again, notice our number down here just changed. So it's at 1500 now. If I go to the next, it should change to 900. That's because after it sets, the carousel resets, and that is the infinite functionality. So you're like going over, you're over, and then once it hits a certain number, it resets quickly and the user can't see it. And that's why we need those extra 3 as like a little buffer. So that's what check index does. And that's why we call it after each like carousel move. And then component will mount. We have to clear timeout our set timeout. That's all that's doing. Shift slide. And I think that's it. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. You know, feel free to play around with this. Try to break it down, to try to improve it. You definitely can. Feel free to change these image sizes, the widths, style components. I'm not going to get into my styling. It still needs updating, but that is the main functionality of a carousel, and I will add this to my GitHub. I think I'm going to do a blog post possibly about a carousel and how I made this, or how you make any carousel, I suppose, in written form. Sorry about that. I had to cut that piece out. I had a text message. So what I was saying is yeah, I'm thinking about creating a carousel blog post, because I think it'll be helpful for people, and that's the whole point of this, is I want to help others, and I think they can learn from that. So that's the functionality of one carousel, and I just want to touch on this before we go, is that now, because we're passing this data in from the index.js, we can also copy websites, right? We can just do a copy and paste, and we can call this, what did I call it up here? It's still called websites, but you can call it YouTube. And you would want to change this to YouTube. And then you would also change this up here. And it's probably broken because I don't have that folder yet. But the idea is you would just copy the websites, make a YouTube folder, and then you would put your YouTube videos in there. And now you can have a second carousel. And it won't break, you know, they'll act independently from each other. And yeah, you can just make as many components as you'd like, and it should work fine. So that is the carousel component of the my blog. Hopefully this helps. I think this is the hardest part, and I think after this it's going to be pretty straightforward and easy, and but hopefully you enjoyed. So continue watching until we can figure this out, and yeah, thanks for watching. Until next time.